Hey everybody, well she's back. It feels to me like a lot longer, but it's been 2 weeks since Time and Tide, and tonight we do have a new episode. Of course, last week was the State of the Union address, which I didn't realize was going to preempt Agent Carter, so I sat down with my notepad ready to watch a new episode, and of course ended up rewatching Time and Tide, which was fun anyway. But tonight we do get a new episode, the Blitzkrieg button, and when I first looked up the episode title, I had a suspicion that it was in reference to one of Howard Stark's big baddies. And of course, I was right, but not in the way that I thought. But we'll get to that soon. Going back and rewatching a little bit of Season 1 of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., it's really interesting because, with the events of the Winter Soldier, it really does color everything that you see in that first season. You really have to go back and think about it and wonder how much of it were they really sketching out at that time. And I read an article, an interview with the creators of Agent Carter, where they're talking about trying to weave the mythology of the Marvel Cinematic Universe into Agent Carter, and it's very interesting because of course it's such a long time ago, but they're able to drop little hints that people will pick up, especially when we see Cap 3 Civil War. But much more on that later. Tonight's episode, the Blitzkrieg button, I thought was pretty good. It starts off with Jarvis doing some kind of a shady deal, and he has $1,000 bills, which at the time weren't quite rare. They were real currency, but generally I feel like they were only for banks to trade with each other. So I feel like those hoods would have a hard time going somewhere and actually being able to deposit those without raising questions. But I don't know. I don't know what the rules were in the 50s on possession of $1,000 bills, but it seemed a little sketchy to me. So it turns out that he's negotiating to purchase a train car, which, surprise, is carrying Howard Stark. And I knew immediately when I saw at the beginning special guest star Dominic Cooper, and I said, yes, this is the one. And I've been waiting to see what's going on in the clip they keep showing where Peggy's saying, I trusted you, Howard. And it was tonight, so I was really excited to see that. So the hoods are trying to extort more money out of Jarvis. And these guys come right from Central Casting's New York hood department. And they're telling him that, hey, I got 3 more guys outside that agree with me. You're going to give us the more money. And Jarvis is not having it. Of course, a gun is pointed at him. And the 3 friends he has outside, they're taken out by Peggy. I don't ever want to find out what it's like to take a high heel to the face. But one of those hoodlums found out tonight. So there's a great hero shot of Peggy as she takes him down, sort of a low angle looking up at her, and I think she had like her hands on her hips, and that was cool. So Howard Stark, he's in the train car, and Jarvis and Peggy are talking to him, and he sees one of the hoods come up behind him, and he throws a cue ball at him, and he's playing pool inside the train car, which is pretty awesome. So it raises the question, why is he back all of a sudden? He's risking a lot to come back to New York. Remember, he's a traitor to the United States government. And everyone's looking for him. Everyone in the country is looking for him. So for him to actually come back to New York City when he should be in like Monaco or something, or somewhere way off the grid, he's taking a really big risk to come back. So it begs the question, why would he risk so much to come back to New York to see Peggy? So Peggy hides him, God help me, why, at the group home at the Griffith. And I didn't pick up this joke until I kind of rewatched the beginning again. But they pull up, and Howard's hiding in the back seat, and he kind of looks up. He goes, oh, the Griffith. He says, how's Miriam? And Peggy kind of rolls her eyes. And I didn't pick up on it at first, but of course, he's been there probably a dozen times, sneaking in and out, cavorting with the ladies there, right under Miriam's nose. So that was a good joke. So we cut to the SSR, and the captain, Chief Dooley, is looking at the 2 Russians who supposedly died at the Battle of Finau. And I need to look up if this was a real battle. I'm assuming that they made it up for the show, or even if this is a reference to something real. But we're looking at, of course, Brannis and Greensuit, who I was actually a little bit confused at the end of the last episode when they had the milk truck, or at the end of episode 2 with the milk truck. She stabs his hand to the truck, and he goes over the edge when, of course, the implosion bomb goes off. For some reason, it didn't strike me that he died. I thought that he got away or something like that, but it seems like he is dead. And Chief Dooley's got his picture, and he's got Brannis' picture. And he says, I've got 2 Russians who supposedly died at the Battle of Finau, but they popped up alive in New York City. So, at the Griffith, Howard, of course, finds a young lady, and there's a great scene where Peggy's trying to hide him from the headmistress, Miriam, and he goes into the dumbwaiter, sort of like the laundry, and they're able to fool the woman because he gets out, puts a bag of laundry, and I don't know where he got it, probably out of the young lady's room, who he's now cavorting with. And there's a good running gag where every time Peggy's looking for him, he's in another girl's room. I don't know if these girls are just starved for attention and affection or what, but they seem all too willing to welcome in a guy who just looks like Howard Stark. He's not going in saying, "Hey, I'm Howard Stark." They think it just looks like him. So he wants to know what devices specifically the SSR has. Of course, Jarvis has informed him that they recovered all of his stolen tech. So he wants to know what specifically do they have. So he gives Peggy a little pen camera, and she's supposed to go there and take pictures of everything there, and he'll review it and make sure nothing's missing and see what they have. So there's a good line where he says to her, "You don't need to get dressed with the door closed." I thought we were friends. Even he's not above hitting on Peggy, which I thought was pretty true to character. So Chief Dooley actually goes to Germany. He goes to Nuremberg, to a prison, to track down a lead on this Colonel Mueller, who was one of the Nazis in Germany who supposedly fought at the Battle of Finau. And he's being held in the prison. He's actually waiting for execution. So he actually goes all the way to Germany. And at first, I keep forgetting that this is SSR. I keep thinking it's just like NYPD sometimes. And I'm like, why would the chief, why would a cop go all the way to Germany? It's outside of his jurisdiction, but I keep remembering it's the precursor to S.H.I.E.L.D., so he'll go wherever he wants to go. So he leaves Thompson in charge, which is a logical choice from Dooley's perspective, but doesn't bode too well for Sousa, who he refers to as a yo-yo, or Peggy, who he refers to as Marge, and immediately tells her to go get the lunch order. So he has no respect for her, doesn't even understand what she's doing there. And there's kind of a tough scene later. There's a few scenes with Thompson, actually. There's one with Sousa, and there's one with Peggy, where we have a couple of kind of tough moments with Thompson, but we will touch on that in a little bit. So Peggy uses the camera pen in the lab, and the lab guys are comically kind of trying to figure out Stark's tech, and there's a guy with like green fire on his shirt, and he's trying to wave it out, and they're trying to figure out what all the different things do. So Sousa tries to lift a print off of the payphone that Jarvis used. So he's still trying to close in on the blonde woman from the party from the very first episode, and from the leads who called in the tech that was on the boat. He needs to find that out. So he goes up to a couple of sort of bums who are sitting on the dock, and he's questioning them, and they're squeezing nickels out of him. But this one guy says he won't talk to him at all. So Sousa presses him a little bit. The bum attacks him, and Sousa holds his own against him. He sort of steps on his neck with his crutch, and kicks the guy around a little bit. And it was good to see that Sousa can hold his own. I mean, I would hope that we know he's not. A big part of this show is not underestimating people at face value. Don't underestimate Peggy because she's a woman, and don't underestimate Sousa because he has the disability with his leg. They're stronger than they're given credit for, and it was good to see that played out here. So we cut to Mr. Mink, who immediately reminds me of, from Lethal Weapon, I think it was 1, Mr. Joshua, the guy who holds like the flame under his hand. His younger brother. The guy's crazy. He's very, very strange, and he has this automatic revolver. And the two hoods who were trying to extort more money out of Jarvis at the beginning of the episode are telling him how a girl jumped him. I mean, 5 or 6 guys. It was 6 or 7 guys. It was crazy. And I enjoyed how they were kind of trying to talk their way out of it, the fact that they got their ass handed to them by Peggy. And it begged the question to me immediately. This Mr. Mink, I mean, stop me, please leave me a comment if I'm wrong, but I don't think we've seen him before. So, who is he? And what was he doing selling Howard Stark's train car to Jarvis? See what I mean? It seems like he's out to get Peggy, but if if you piece it together, it seems like he was the one in possession who actually smuggled Howard Stark back into New York. So I was a little bit confused about the relationship there. I don't know if it's a plot hole or if I missed something. So if you know, please leave me a comment and let me know, because I can't piece that together. But he was supposed to get $150,000, and they didn't get it. So he kills both hoods in cold blood with his automatic revolver. He says, I'm going to do this myself. So he gets up and he's going to go out. And he's going to get back. He's basically going to get revenge on Peggy. So Sousa is interrogating the bum back at the SSR headquarters. And there was a really nice character moment with him where he's telling a story. He's trying to make a connection with the guy because he knows that he's a vet too. Now, we've been calling him a bum to this point, but he's obviously a homeless vet. And he recognizes this, and he says, when I got back from the war, I walked into a diner and everybody stood up and started applauding for me. And he was kind of looking around. He realizes that they were applauding for him. And he sits down and he's eating, and then another veteran or a GI comes in returning from the war, and nobody does anything. And he realizes that they weren't applauding for him. They were applauding for his leg. And it's because they felt guilty about his injury. They felt awkward and guilty towards him, so they overcompensated by showering this praise on him. They didn't shower the praise on the next guy because they didn't feel bad for him. And it kind of gave you a little bit more information into Sousa's psyche, which I think is good because he's the only character so far that we can see in parallel to Peggy and what she's going through. So I think it was a good decision to give more depth on his background. Sousa says to him, you think because I wear a suit and I have a clean shave that we're different. But he's trying to explain to him that they're the same so he can trust him. And he wants to know what he saw at the pier that night. But the guy still says to him, I'm not talking to any cops. So later Thompson comes in with a hamburger and a bottle of booze. And he's saying, you can have all this if you just tell us what you saw. So he tells him he saw a well-dressed guy and a brunette woman. And they went onto the ship. A few minutes later they came off, and that's all he saw. And he takes the liquor. He doesn't even want the hamburger. He takes the liquor and he just starts pounding it right there at the table. And Thompson, who heard the whole story, Sousa's, spilling his heart, showing everything that was inside him. First he says to him, I would clap for you, but I don't want to embarrass you. And then he later says, not everyone's came back from the war looking for applause. It's pretty heartless of Thompson. And I just wonder if they're making him just a caricature of just a real ass, or he's probably more of a plot device to really let us commiserate more with Sousa and with Peggy about what they're dealing with. He's a representation of the attitudes, I suppose, at the time of a lot of people. So SSR got everything. Everything that was stolen from Stark was on the ship. So nothing's missing, which is good news. But the bad news is that they have the Blitzkrieg button. And Stark explains that it was created for the English, for the British, when the Germans were flying over for the Blitzkrieg. And it would knock out all the lights and all the power in the city. But unfortunately, there was no way to turn it back on. It fried the electrical circuits of the whole city. So, they never used it. And he knows there's no way to undo the damage, so he knows how it's very damaging. It's very dangerous to have something that can destroy the city's entire electrical grid. And he doesn't want to be known as the person who destroyed the greatest city in the world, New York City, to him. So he just happens to have a mock-up of the button in his bag that she can switch out like Indiana Jones. So he makes the point, Peggy asks him, how do you know that they would even push the button, that they would try to use it if they got their hands on it? And he says, since when have you known the U.S. military to have a weapon and not use it? Which reminded me of the Jericho missile in Iron Man, when Tony Stark says, the best weapon is one you'll never have to use. And he says, I disagree. I think the best weapon is one that you only have to use once. That's the way Dad did it. And I thought that he was referring to the atomic bomb, which I don't know how much Howard Stark had to do with that. But now we're finding out that he had things that were maybe a lot worse. when we're looking at like these implosion bombs and things like that. It's arguable, but I did like that connection back to the first Iron Man. So if it's so dangerous, who, why, what? So if it's so dangerous, why was Stark even storing it in his house? You got to ask yourself the question, why didn't he disable it or something like that? And of course, we do find out the answer in a little bit. It's not what it seems. But it just made me think, does he store things like we do? He puts this Blitzkrieg button in his vault, just like we would through our Christmas decorations in our attic. And it just must be the way he does business. So, back to Dooley in Nuremberg, and this was a great scene. He goes to the prison, and they're actually measuring Mueller's neck for a noose. And he says, oh, they're getting me my new necktie, pardon the gallows humor. And that took me a minute to sort of realize what he was talking about, and that he was about to be executed. Good timing by Dooley. So he asks him, he says, for info about the Battle of Finau, he will help Mueller escape. And he says to him that there was no Battle of Finau. No Germans fought any Russians that day. When the Germans got there, the Russian bodies were piled high and they were ripped apart. Now, who did it? Who did it and why? That's the main question for me of this episode is what really happened at the Battle of Finau. It's got to have something to do with Leviathan, but they don't touch on it again. They don't even say the name Leviathan in this episode, which is frustrating because I want to know more about it. So Dooley gives him a cyanide capsule. He says, no one will get the satisfaction of watching you hang and you can have a painless death. But as he's walking out, he offers the guard a breath mint, so he double-crossed him. I mean, the guy was a Nazi, so obviously Dooley had no sympathy for him, and I can respect that. So Peggy goes back, and, she actually asks she asks Jarvis what would happen. So Peggy's going back to SSR to make the swap and get the Blitzkrieg button back. And she asked Jarvis, would Stark ever push the button? And Jarvis, he's kind of sweating. He's pulling at his ear. And he says, oh, no, of course not. And Peggy says, there's something Stark isn't telling me. And Jarvis is telling her, no, everything's fine. It was a little obvious, but clearly he's lying. But why? Mr. Mink is right behind them on their tail, trailing them right to SSR. So Peggy makes the swap, and she actually flips the switch. Why in the world would she do that? I know she didn't trust Stark, that he was telling her the whole truth, but what if it really was a bomb? Or what if it really knocked out all the power in New York City permanently? What if it did something worse? What if it destroyed the world? There's obviously something that he was scared of with it, that he would risk everything to come back to New York City to get this thing back. And there was something that Jarvis wasn't telling her. So I thought it was a little out of character for her to actually flip that switch and see what it does. It opens, and there's a little red vial. On the way out, she runs into Thompson. And I'm waiting for a time where he's going to redeem his character. I'm waiting for a moment of redemption for this guy. And he says to her, as he's drinking the bottle of booze that he gave the bum from earlier, why do you even work here? And she says to him, well, to uphold democracy, of course. And for a second, I was hoping he was going to say something like, because you're a damn good agent. Or, I see a lot of potential in you. But no, he goes the complete opposite way with it. He says, no man will ever consider you an equal. It's the natural order of the universe. Real caricature of 50s sexism. Might have been very true to life, but it is tough to watch. So I don't know if he will have any redemption. I think, I don't know if he's going to get what's coming to him. I hope in the end Peggy shows him what she can do. And I don't really care if she earns his respect or not. I hope she earns Dooley's respect. I hope she earns Dooley's job. But Thompson, I have no patience for the guy. He's a jerk to Susan. He's a jerk to Peggy. So while Mink lays in wait, he actually trails them back to the Griffith and apparently kills a flower delivery guy. He goes inside trying to deliver flowers to Peggy, gets her room number, and heads upstairs. Meanwhile, in probably the best scene of the episode, Peggy confronts Howard about him lying. There was no Blitzkrieg button. It's Captain America's blood in that vial. And she punches him right in the face. We cut to commercial. We come back. She is so offended that he even has this, that he's desecrating what remains of the man she loves and one of the best heroes that there's ever been. And the loss is still really fresh for her as well. So she's very upset with him, not only for lying, but for desecrating the memory of Captain America. He explains that the government had one vial and he had one vial, and he believes he can use it to cure all diseases, to cure the common cold, to save thousands of lives. And Peggy says to him, "Yeah, but how much are you going to make off it?" And he says, what do you take me for? What kind of person do you think I am? She's not going to give him the benefit of the doubt in any way. She firmly believes that he's in it only for the money. And it got me thinking a little bit about how Stark Industries later is going to be selling weapons to the enemy. Of course, it wasn't specifically Tony's fault, but it definitely raises questions of, even if this blood could cure any disease, if it could save all these lives, does Howard have a right to possess it, to possess a piece of Steve Rogers? That's a question I can't answer, but Peggy's made her decision, and that's the important part. No, he does not have any right to it, so she doesn't even give it to him. So she asks Howard to leave, and Mr. Mink comes up, and he's knocking on the door, and he runs into, of all people, little Dorothy from, I think it was Iowa. And he says, "Get back in your room." And she says, "That's a nice gun. I want it." And out of nowhere, she does this jujitsu on him, kills him, and takes the gun. I knew there was no reason that they would make so much of an effort to introduce her character last week and then just have her be another girl who lives there, be a girlfriend to Peggy. There was no need for it. My dad I asked the question. He said, "Is this, could this be Mrs. Romanoff? Could it be like Natasha's mother?" And of course, she's not Russian. She doesn't have the right look, but she has the moves. She's got those Black Widow moves. But I think she's an assassin working for Leviathan. And like I said, in a show with a really strong female protagonist, it would make all the sense in the world to have a really strong female antagonist. So, Green Suit, who I thought was going to be the main bad guy of the show, dead. Leet Brannis, dead. Mr. Mink, who they built up all episode to be some real badass, dead at the hands of little Dottie. So, one thing I forgot to mention is that Howard, he makes the point to say to Peggy, I was protecting you basically from her emotions. And this is when she says, "I trusted you, Howard." And that betrayal of trust is everything to Peggy. She makes the point later to say that the men who don't respect her, at least she can trust them because they're honest in their disrespect. So Stark has probably the character moment of the week, and he talks about his poor upbringing. And he talks about how, just like Sousa's disability with his leg and Peggy's perceived flaw being a woman, he likens that to his difficult upbringing being very poor. And he makes the point to say that there's a glass ceiling for social class, religion, sex, and the show is really making a point to tie these things together and to really show that the people who you might not expect to be strong are stronger than anyone sometimes. And I thought that was pretty well done. Next week's episode is called The Iron Ceiling, which is a nice playoff on the Iron Curtain and the glass ceiling, but we'll have to wait till next week for that. So, So we find out that Jarvis knew the whole time, of course, and Peggy confronts him about it. And he goes and sits down. Peggy walks away, and Jarvis sits down next to two men getting a shoe shine. A shoe shine. Say that 5 times. The first one, takes, and they're both obviously holding up newspapers to their face, hiding. And for a half second, I thought maybe it was going to be Lee Brannis in green suit back again, but it was Howard Stark. And for the most wanted guy in America, again, he's sitting in the middle of, I guess, Manhattan getting a shoe shine. But the guy next to him, the obligatory Stan Lee cameo. Okay, Stan Lee created these characters, comic genius, excellent writer, funny guy. I liked him. I like him all his cameos. I liked him on The Big Bang Theory. He had a good cameo there. He was in his pajamas, and Sheldon kept knocking on his door. But enough already with the Stan Lee cameos. I don't know. I feel like a few of them were fun. They were cute. It's just every single movie he's got and he has every right to. They're his characters, but I feel like enough already with the Stan Lee cameo. But this one was quick. He's getting his shoe shine, and we find out that Thompson found out that Stark landed in a plane the day after the Battle of Finau, so he was there. So he knows more than he's even letting on. So Dooley, who's back from Nuremberg, says we get ourselves a conspiracy. So the evidence is piling up against Stark. If he has any chance of clearing his name, they better do it quick, because we only have 4 episodes left. So Peggy bashes a hole in her wall, hides Captain America's blood, and while she's doing that, she turns the music all the way up so no one hears the banging, and she hangs a picture over it. And little Dottie's next door playing with her new gun. And she's got this psychotic look on her face, and she really, when she killed Ming, she really snapped. And she goes, and when someone's knocking at her door, says, "Oh, hey, it's time for dinner." She's playing with the gun, and she goes, "I'll be right there in a jiff." And it was really creepy. She's a real sociopath, and she scares me a little bit. I don't like her. So it ends with Sousa right on Peggy's trail. He's got the fingerprints off the phone. I don't know if they're going to get Jarvis with that, but he's looking at the picture of Peggy with the blonde wig just from the back, and he starts coloring in the hair, realizing that maybe that's not the hair color. He knows that's the woman that they're looking for, and maybe she's just a master of disguise. So he is zeroing in on Peggy, and I have a feeling in the next couple of weeks, well, obviously in the next couple of weeks, but I feel like they're going to save that confrontation for probably the last episode. And it's going to be, she's going to have one chance to prove that she's innocent and that she's not a traitor too, and to clear Howard Stark's name. So the central questions for me are, who the heck was Mr. Mink? Did we see him before, or did they just bring him in this episode and kill him as a function to show that Dottie is the real villain, or she's the one you need to worry about? Did these people all work for Leviathan? Was Leviathan behind the Battle of Finau? What happened at the Battle of Finau? Well, there was no battle. But what happened to those Russians? What happened to those bodies? Obviously, they were doing some kind of a testing, because if Brannis and Greensuit were there, I don't believe that they assumed their identities. If they were there, what does it say about that scar that they have? Maybe they were doing testing on all those Russians and all the bodies that were piled high that Mueller alluded to. Maybe those were the test subjects gone wrong. That's definitely something that we need to find out about. And the episode ends in the best, creepiest way possible. The typewriter starts typing. That long-range communicating typewriter. Click, 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 click. And Dooley kind of looks up, and he looks over at it. And I'm saying, "Oh, please show us what it's writing." And it cuts. So luckily, the president will not be speaking next week, and we will find out what is on that typewriter. And how does Dottie fit into all this? Who is she? Is she just another soldier? Is she the mastermind behind it? Inquiring minds want to know. So I talked at the beginning a little bit about that interview with Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely, who are the creators of the Agent Carter show. And they gave us a lot of information about their vision for the show. I assumed it was just going to be an 8-episode miniseries and it would be done, but they're talking about hoping that it gets picked up for like a second season or like a second series. And they might try to do 22 episodes. And that's going to make things a lot more complicated because they've said that the show is going to end with the Marvel one-shot, that is the canon ending to this part of Peggy's story. So they're building to that. So at the end of this run, you could watch the Agent Carter one-shot, and that would be the story. But if it goes for season 2, they're going to have to find a way to put more obstacles in front of her. And they've said that they would never want it to do every week it's a different kind of bad guy. Every week it's a different hoodlum, because that does get old quick. The Marvel Universe and Agent Carter would not lend itself properly to a procedural. It can't become a police procedural like a CSI or a Law and Order, or every week there's a different case. It's really got to be arc-driven. It's got to be a story arc, and it's got to be a character arc. And Peggy's character, I don't think, moved as much as it did the previous weeks, but this week we definitely saw her dealing with some hurt and some emotions and confronting this prejudice in the workplace that Thompson's throwing at her. And I was expecting her to show him up and to show him who was boss, but no, she just walks out. And I forget exactly what she says, but it wasn't any smart comment. She didn't put him in his place. He needs to be put in his place, but she didn't do it this week. So they talked about Hydra as well, and how knowing how Hydra figures into S.H.I.E.L.D. colors everything we know about S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 1, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 1, but it's also going to color how we look at the SSR. And even now in its infancy, we have to ask ourselves, what is that Hydra connection? I think Thompson's probably too stupid to be Hydra, but who knows? Dooley very well could be. It's hard to say at this point. But Marcus and McFeely have alluded to the fact that we're going to learn a little bit more about that as we move forward, especially if we go for a season 2. So they also talked about how Howard and Tony Stark are, echoes of each other, and they reflect one another. But how Howard, we'd found out tonight, has that baggage of his poor upbringing and the adversity he had to face. And of course there's a parallel to the adversity Seuss is facing and that Peggy's facing. But Tony almost carries Howard as baggage, and that legacy, that demand for excellence from him. He has to live up to his father's name, but at the same time carry that baggage of everything that he was. And he wasn't a saint by any stretch. So the more we learn about Howard Stark, the more we learn about Tony. And I'm looking forward to that as well. So next week, the Iron Curtain. I think we'll definitely see more of Dottie. And I hope that they mention Leviathan again. I wonder if that's going to be They don't have an order to season 2 now, so they've got to try to wrap that up. I mean, the episodes are already written, so they already know where it ends. So I hope that they do wrap up at least part of the Leviathan storyline. If it does go to season 2, we need to have enough mysteries to go forward. But I think there's enough stories in the Agent Carter universe, even without going into superheroes, just in the world of espionage, that would keep the interest. And by the end of this season, I see that I see us clearing Howard Stark's name, and I see Peggy maybe getting some respect, and Sousa as well, hopefully, getting the respect he deserves. So until next week, thank you very much for watching. Please leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. And looking forward to next week. Thanks very much.